So now that we've talked a little bit about the definition of AWS, we've covered the shared responsibility model. Now let's talk about the fundamental required atomic unit of AWS, the AWS account. And you can think of this as a sort of container for your account resources. Every resource that you provision in AWS has to be associated with one and only one AWS account. Now, that does not stop you from sharing resources where there are features to do so, where you can do cross-account activity and permissions, but each resource has to be associated with one and only one account. And the AWS account has a number of different useful operations, such as being a unit of organization. It is becoming more and more standard for companies today to have more than one account, to be able to isolate their workloads from each other properly. And using a service like AWS Organizations, you can actually create an inverted tree of accounts and treat them like organizational units. It is also a unit of billing. There is a monthly bill that is associated with every AWS account. There are features for consolidating the bills, but it is an atomic unit of where the bills come from. And it is a unit for access. You can define permissions within the individual AWS accounts to help isolate your workloads and the various operations from each other in that way as well. Each AWS account is going to require a single root user. And this is going to show up in the form of a unique email address. A root user cannot have the same email address for more than one AWS account. An account also has to have billing information. So either it is part of a consolidated billing structure, or it has actual payment information within the account itself. And finally, you need contact information, a name, an address, a verifiable phone number for your account to be fully provisioned. Now, within each of these accounts, we're going to have resources. And each resource in AWS has a globally unique identifier called an Amazon Resource Name, or ARN. And this ARN is represented as a string with different fields separated by colons. The first field is simply ARN, A-R-N colon. The second field is going to be a partition. Most AWS customers are going to see this as just AWS, but as you can see here, there are a couple of choices, AWS CN for China or US Gov for GovCloud. The next field is the name of the service, and I've listed a couple of examples here, but all the services that have a Service API endpoint are going to be represented in this section. The next field is optional, and it represents the region. We're going to talk about the global infrastructure coming up in just a little bit, so don't worry, you're going to get a full definition of how all of this works. But if a service has a region associated with it, it will show up here, and if it doesn't, it will simply be an empty field. Next, we have the account ID, and this is going to be represented by a 12-digit string of numbers. And finally, we have the resource ID. And this will be the identifier within the service and the region and the account that uniquely identifies the resource. And there are a lot of different options here. IAM users, EC2 instances, EBS volumes, S3 buckets, objects within the buckets. And we're going to talk about all of these during our course.